Star Wars Age of the Republic is a two-part book that's part of a new line Disney and Marvel have decided to try. Each movie trilogy will have two age-off paperbacks, one heroes and one villains. The first era to get the treatment was the prequel era, with Age of the Republic heroes being released first, then Age of the Republic villains released a week later. I had been wondering if we were going to see any more Jedi of the Republic comics after the Mace Windu one, in a similar fashion to the Jedi Clone Wars comics released over a decade ago, but it doesn't seem like we'll be getting any more of those, so this collection of one-shot comics seems to be taking its place. Age of the Republic Heroes is made up of 4 24-page one-shot comics, with each issue focusing on Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala, plus 2 of the stories from the special. Qui-Gon Jinn's story is called Balance, and when you start reading it, you hit the ground running. It opens with him being fired upon while trying to protect the Priestess of Wood on the planet Bryn. His task is to protect her and her trees from the Clan of Metal, and since the only way they can cut down the trees is with her word or her blood, Qui-Gon chooses to take her to Coruscant instead, and I thought that was a pretty clever solution. In the Jedi Temple, Qui-Gon and Master Yoda have a heart-to-heart, with Qui-Gon questioning the role and portrayal of the Jedi in the Republic. He's concerned that the Jedi are being seen as great warriors rather than peacekeepers, and apart from the Clone Wars themselves, this conversation is something that Yoda may have thought of when he told Luke that wars don't make one great. It's a nice little reference, as well as tying in nicely with Master and Apprentice and Qui-Gon's views on the Code and the Jedi Order in that book. Qui-Gon leaves in search of answers and guidance from the Force, ending up on some unnamed planet where he discovers beautiful wildlife, but a structure with a strong presence of the dark side. I wasn't really sure what to make of the place because visually the structure looked like a Sith temple, but on a much smaller scale, and it seemed to be made of living wood, and it also seemed to have some man-made things in it like stairs and a throne. I really just have no idea what this place was, and I like that. It's interesting, it left me asking questions. So Qui-Gon meditates in the darkness, believing that light can be found anywhere, and he has a Force vision where he has to fight off half a dozen enemies made of red living wood, but after dispatching them he realises they are all members of the Council. Ultimately he succumbs to the symbiote like red wood and is encased by it, at which point he wakes up. I thought this was particularly interesting because this is something else that ties in with Master and Apprentice and Qui-Gon's vision that he had in that book, and I think since he seems to be taking this vision seriously, it must take place after Master and Apprentice but before episode 1. Qui-Gon realises the light has found its way into the cave, and it occurs to him that there can be balance in all things if nurtured correctly, and this makes him realise that the Jedi could easily lose their balance if they were not kept in check. He informs the Priestess of Wood that there are many on Coruscant who would help her if she wanted, and that accepting help didn't mean the end of her culture, and then he talks to Master Yoda about his experience, where he states the Jedi must be willing to bend somewhat, or else they would snap like a rigid tree in the wind. Yoda warns him that the Jedi must never bend towards the dark, and Qui-Gon agrees, then tells Yoda he understands that the Jedi's purpose is balance. It's only a 24-page story, but for the length of it, it was okay. Jodie Houser did a great job leading the book towards the movies because rather than just relying on a story, she's added a few metaphors and references, and as such, if you think about it, the whole story feels quite predictive. I think Qui-Gon was right at the end where he stated the Jedi needed balance, because the fact is the Jedi are unbalanced. They do not walk between the dark and the light the way a grey Jedi would. They walk firmly on one side of the line, and I think Yoda may have misinterpreted what Qui-Gon meant. This of course leads up to Anakin's fate as the Chosen One. The vision Qui-Gon had in the Dark Side Shrine was very prophetic, with all the Council dead and Qui-Gon along with them, which we know is how things end up. Perhaps when Qui-Gon met Anakin he realised he was the darkness this prophecy referenced, and would have been able to let out his anger a bit more in his training while still managing to control him. Or perhaps he would have found a way to squash it all together. Or perhaps he knew Anakin had to fall to the darkness so that he could let the light in and bring balance, just like the light at the Dark Side Shrine. It's not made clear, but That's not a bad thing. The fact is, it was a Force vision and they are ambiguous and unreliable at the best of times, so not explicitly stating to the reader that this is what the vision means was the right way to go about it in my opinion, because we don't know for sure how Qui-Gon interpreted it, so it leaves it open to the reader for interpretation. It's not like The Last Jedi where you have to just make shit up to force it to make sense. This is deliberately ambiguous and it works. I've got to admit, I've never been a fan of the way Force ghosts and the Jedi's connection to the Force were presented in the Clone Wars, with Master Yoda having to undergo some sort of test to please the Whills in order to begin training to keep his personality when he dies and joins the Force. The reason I didn't like it is because I have always considered the connection to the Force to be a spiritual one, and spiritual connections like that require no outside influences, so it was a step back in terms of lore in my opinion, and I would have liked to have seen Jodie Howser play with that a little bit and maybe show how Qui-Gon came to learn how to return from the Force. As I said, it's only a 24-page issue, so I think I am asking a bit too much from it, but if she'd have swapped out all that stuff about the tree people and the metal people and had Qui-Gon on a solitary soul-searching journey, I feel like that story combined with the visual aspect would have made for a deeper, more interesting comic that influenced the lore that much more. That's not to say Qui-Gon is a bad comic, it isn't by any means. In fact, I found it very easy to read, and for a 24-page one-shot, it was really enjoyable. The second story is Obi-Wan Kenobi's and it's called Mission and focuses on him and Anakin sometime between The Phantom Menace and Obi-Wan and Anakin. It deals with Obi-Wan's trepidation at taking Anakin with him on a mission for the first time and how he's wary that both he as a master and Anakin as an apprentice may not be ready for a mission where actual danger may occur. It was a good little story, and just like Qui-Gon, there wasn't much there plot-wise. The Jedi receive a request from the planet Dalanor to collect a newly excavated Jedi holocron, because since it was discovered, pirates have been giving them hassle, and they just want the thing gone so the pirates have no reason to bother them. They go to Dalanor, retrieve the holocron, beat the pirates, and leave. Again, it's just a 24-page story, so you can't really have too much of a story in there if you want to have a closer look at the characters as well. And that's the thing, just like Qui-Gon's issue, there's a lot of character depth. We see Anakin feeling frustrated at being left behind at the temple all the time, feeling like he was a burden to Obi-Wan because Qui-Gon was meant to be his master but died, so Obi-Wan got stuck with him. And we see Obi-Wan question himself and how he can be a better master to Anakin and deliver to him the training and the knowledge that he needs to one day become a great Jedi Knight. And we see how these two resolve their issues, and again, it's great writing, because it really does feel like it's in the gap between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Anakin is strong in the Force and headstrong, but not overly confident like he was in Attack of the Clones, and Obi-Wan really reflects what we see at the beginning of Attack of the Clones, where he's still trying to find a way to control Anakin, teach him patience and wisdom, but trying to do it without seeming to be overbearing and ungrateful of his abilities. And I think Jodie Howser did a great job of capturing the essence of both characters between those movies. She made them believable. Anakin Skywalker has the third story and it's called The Sacrifice, and I really enjoyed it. It's very rare that we get to see Clone Wars era Anakin think with his head and at certain times let the young boy shine through, and that's exactly what The Sacrifice does. Aboard the Resolution, Admiral Yularen informs Anakin about a neutral factory world on the edge of the war that had very recently decided to side with the Separatists. It's an ideal opportunity for the Republic forces to get a leg up on the enemy and take out a key location before the Separatists can even start manufacturing droids and other weaponry there. The caveat is that it needs to be a quick and decisive strike in order for it to be effective, not give the Separatists a chance to rally their defences and cause minimal loss of life to the clone army. This doesn't sit well with Anakin, and it's where he really shines in this comic, and rather than jumping in headfirst as he does all the fucking time in the Clone Wars show, he actually stops to contemplate the repercussions of such an attack. It's so easy to think of Anakin as a Jedi just because of all the lightsaber swinging and the Force abilities he was showing off in the prequels and the Clone Wars, but we very rarely get to see him just sit and contemplate the repercussions of tactical strikes and how he can put his abilities to good use, or even if he should at all. I absolutely loved seeing this because it really shows off his character more than his abilities, and love the movie or hate it, but one of the strongest things about episode 1 was Jake Lloyd's performance. In fact, even though he delivered his lines with less accuracy than his biggest competition for the role, he was chosen because when he got them right, he delivered his lines with so much feeling. So seeing Anakin with a human side rather than just being powerful and full of anger and swinging a lightsaber was brilliant. If you believe the movies and shows, Anakin's angry more often than the Hulk, and we know that's not true because we hear about it, so it's nice to actually see it for once. Anakin questions Yularen's plan because of the risk it poses to the innocent workers on the planet, and it comes to the attention of Obi-Wan, who then sits down with Anakin and discusses it with him. It was a nice moment, and it reminded me of a similar conversation that was in the first volume of the Legends Clone Wars comic. It was nice to see Obi-Wan and Anakin sharing a quiet moment together, like they were both lost in the war and trying to find their way through it without sacrificing their morals to win. It was also nice to see them just talking as equals, because while we see a few moments of it in Revenge of the Sith, we don't really get to see much of it at all when it comes to the whole prequel era, including the Clone Wars cartoon, so I found it to be really enjoyable. Ultimately, Anakin was right to question how to attack, because when he sneaks down to the planet, he discovers that the planet hadn't joined the Separatists, they'd been taken as slaves. This was a crossroads moment for me because the way I saw it, there were two choices. They could have done the obvious default Anakin thing and just had him go into angry mode and kill all the droids, or, and this is what I was hoping for, we could have had Anakin control himself like a Jedi Knight should and deal with the situation properly. What they went with was a mix between the two, but it worked really well because the scars from his youth are still there under the surface, but they don't control his actions in the present. He deals with the droids in the immediate area, then lets the proud people of the planet fight their own way out with him acting as backup. By not taking out every droid in the place and letting the people escape with their pride intact, it shows Anakin was in control. So what we have is Anakin who still remembers what it's like to suffer, but doesn't let that suffering control him, and it's the Anakin I've always wanted to see and never actually got until now. Jody Houser did a fantastic job with his character. At the end, it's revealed that the whole thing was a plan by the Separatists to gain more worlds throughout the galaxy. By leaking the information that they'd set up a new factory on the planet, they expected the Republic to retaliate without thinking, which in turn would have caused the deaths of countless innocents in an attack from the Republic. This would have made many star systems across the galaxy see the Republic as evil and join the Separatists. Obviously, this was stopped by Anakin, and the whole story just works so well together. It's one of the best stories in this trade. Padme's story is called Bridge, and it follows Padme and two of her handmaidens as they attempt to sway a neutral planet to join the Republic in the war against the Separatists. When they land, they're shot at by a sniper, they hide in the building against the advice of the Second Minister. The First Minister dies, they catch the sniper, and the Second Minister agrees there may be some way to help the Republic without actually aligning with them. That's it, there's not actually much to the story, and compared to the others it seems a little flat. Rather than seeming like a deeper story, it came across as a very short guide to who Padme was. It was okay, but out of the full 24-page stories in this book, it's easily the least entertaining one. It's not as bad as 501+1, but still pretty bad. The next two stories are from the special, and while there were actually 3 stories in it, the third is in the villains trade because it's about Asajj Ventress, but the 2 stories in the heroes trade are Mace Windu in The Weapon and Captain Rex and Jar Jar Binks in 501+1. Yay. And they're 10 pages long each. Mace Windu's is first, and we see him imprisoned and being led to a warlord's hideout. The warlord himself kidnaps children and makes them fight for his cause as freedom fighters in exchange for food. Ultimately, Mace Windu escapes his constraints, rebuilds his broken lightsaber with the Force, takes down the bad guys, and tries to free the children. It's all good fun, but the real weight of the story is the fact that when Mace Windu discusses with Master Yoda about releasing the children so they can be adopted, Yoda refuses, instead insisting that the children must face imprisonment because the Jedi can't interfere with local laws. It's an interesting point, but I would have thought that since the planet they were on was part of the Republic, certain laws would be enforced on a galaxy-wide scale, like if a child killed someone under duress after being kidnapped and brainwashed, so that didn't really fly with me. The other thing it makes you realise is that it's a very similar situation to what you see with doctors on TV all the time. In every show there seems to be an episode where there's a death row prisoner wheeled in for surgery days before their execution date, and the focus of those episodes is on the morals of whether it's right to save someone just so they can be executed. It's a question that there's no definitive answer for, and the last thing we see in Mace's story is him pondering the question. If he saved the children only so they can be imprisoned by someone else, did he really save them at all? So while I don't like how Yoda's logic got the story to that point, it is food for thought. There's a couple of references to the rest of the Star Wars universe, such as when someone throws a rock at Mace Windu's head and shouts "Ichuta" at him, which is exactly what the Silver Protocol droid said to 3PO when he wandered around Cloud City before being shot by that Cornish Imperial. And we also see Mace building his first lightsaber with Master Huyang, just like in the Clone Wars show. Just FYI, anyone who didn't read that with David Tennant's voice, he voiced the character in the Clone Wars show, so if you want it to be like the show, do it like Doctor Who. It's worth noting that while the other stories in the special are clearly set during the Clone Wars, at first I didn't find it so clear with this one. The Warlord mentions that Chancellor Valorum sent the Jedi to deal with him, but I couldn't quite tell whether this was really set before Episode 1, or if it was set during the Clone Wars and the Warlord had hidden down in the tunnels and away from civilization for so long that he was unaware that the Supreme Chancellor had changed. Fortunately, at the end of the story, Qui-Gon is drawn in, so it's definitely set before the Phantom Menace, but still, this is why a timeline with dates and years would come in handy. I say it in pretty much every video. I don't know why they don't do it. Paolo Villanelli did the pencils and Eric Arciniega did the colours, and they've both done okay. Not my favourite style, but the art serves its purpose well enough. The second story from the special is Rex and Jar Jar's. I didn't find it very entertaining, to be honest. Jar Jar gets under everyone's feet, takes the dead Jedi's lightsaber to help Rex, who's ordered his men to evacuate but has himself snuck around the perimeter of a hostile location in an attempt to shut down the shields so his men can attack. Jar Jar turns up and helps save him with the lightsaber, Rex takes it away, and that's pretty much that. The only thing the story does well is show how much Rex values his team. I personally don't really care for Rex because I don't like the Clone Wars cartoon, but if people like the Clone Wars cartoon and Rex, then I'm sure they'll get a kick out of this comic. Apart from that, there's just nothing here, and it's slapstick to the point that it reminds me of the shitty strips Chris Eliopoulos and Geordie Belair do. Even the art is in a similar style to theirs. Caspar Wungard did the pencils, and they seem quite basic and have a distinct lack of detail, and Chris Peter did the colours, and they seem to be as basic as they can be without dipping into Geordie Belair territory. It's a shame because they could have used this space to do a story that mattered so much more. So the special really wasn't very good in my opinion. It barely gave you anything to think about, didn't reveal anything important or examine the characters' personalities or driving forces, and overall goes to show that while you really can work wonders with a 24-page comic, realistically 10 pages just isn't enough to do anything of value. I liked the art in the book overall. Apart from the two stories in the special, the creative team for all four comics was mostly the same, with Corey Smith doing the pencils and Harva Tartaglia doing the colours, and Wilton Santos occasionally joining in to work on the pencils too, and they've done a great job, with Smith and Santos's drawings doing a great job of showing what's going on, with a good sense of action while also having his characters instantly recognisable, especially Yoda, who I always find is hit or miss when it comes to comic art. In Qui-Gon's comic, there's a very cool moment at the beginning where he has to jump and lift the priestess onto a ship, and he has his lightsaber spinning all around him, deflecting laser blasts, and it looks awesome. Coruscant gleams in the day just like it did in Phantom Menace, and the sunset looks almost identical to how it did at the end of Revenge of the Sith. It's a touch yellower because Qui-Gon Jinn is set before the Phantom Menace, but that had a brighter colour scheme than the other two movies. I love the look of the Unknown Planet because it's probably the most vibrant pages in the comic. It has green grass and blue skies, and I think the use of purple plants really added a quite surreal alien vibe to it, and the colours used in Qui-Gon's Force vision also helped show how disorientated and off balance he was. Obi-Wan's comic had a pretty cool scene where he fights off the pirates, but apart from that, nothing particularly stood out to me as much as it did in Qui-Gon's story, except for the fact that there's a nice little flashback to the Phantom Menace where Anakin meets Obi-Wan for the first time, and my god, they've actually drawn Jake Lloyd. I don't know why everyone is so eager to draw Hayden Christensen all the time, especially when we know what Anakin looked like as a little kid. So while throughout the rest of the comic he does look like Christensen's Anakin, it was nice to see Lloyd for once, if ever so briefly. I also noticed that for the memory of Qui-Gon's death scene, Smith drew the scene wrong. Maul backstabbed Qui-Gon then walked away, but in Obi-Wan's comic he's drawn it as if Maul and Qui-Gon were facing each other and he was stabbed head on. It's just one scene that doesn't match up with the movie, and I think things like that should. It's not difficult to get things like that right. Anakin's story was the only one to have a change in the creative team. It had the exact same team except for the fact that it had both Corey Smith and Wilton Santos on pencils for some reason. I had mixed feelings about the art, and that's mostly because rather than drawing Anakin as he appears in the films, they seem to have tried to draw him as he appears in the Clone Wars show, but realistically, and it just looks a little strange. In spite of that, the way Anakin's been drawn shows off his boyishness rather than just his brashness, and he even has the old blue eyes back, and the art all works to show the human side of Anakin. It ties in really well with the story, and I really enjoyed it. In terms of how art can connect to the story in a comic book, Anakin's story does a good job of showing how important it is. The art in Padme's story was also penciled by Corey Smith and Wilton Santos, and it was also good, and what stood out to me most was the costume design. I can imagine the costumes they were wearing as very thick fabric. I liked the art in the page where Padme shot the assassin. It got a bit boring with the story though, because both of Padme's servants looked similar to her. Her face may as well have been drawn the same. This didn't need to happen though, because unlike in The Phantom Menace, she wasn't attempting to hide her identity, and we know this because in the comic she wore a different outfit from what her handmaidens wore, so it would have been nice to see a bit of variety in their faces. The art for the whole book was definitely very good. It was nice and vibrant, characters were instantly recognisable, there was a good sense of both action and emotion, and I think the art team did really well. The back of the book has all the variant covers, and some of them are really cool, like the Qui-Gon as a Padawan print by Ian McKay. Even though Qui-Gon still looks like a 40-year-old man, I think it's the worry lines on his forehead or something, I don't know, but he definitely doesn't look young. Another variant for the Qui-Gon issue by Giuseppe Camuncoli and Elia Bonetti, which really reminds me of the cover of the graphic novel for episode 1. The Obi-Wan variant by Raza, which if they changed Obi-Wan to how he looked in episode 1 and gave him a green lightsaber, really reminds me of the cover for the Obi-Wan game that was on the original Xbox. And the Anakin variant cover by Rod Reis, which has the camera looking at Jango on Geonosis while Mace Windu is coming at him with a lightsaber. And I thought this was really funny because we all know his head gets chopped off, so it reminds me of those shitty fucking clickbait ads you get where they're like, "You won't believe these pictures taken moments before people died." It probably wasn't meant to remind people of that, but it reminded me of that because that's literally what Jango was like moments before he died. One final thing worth noting is that after each story there's a page dedicated to the history of the character written by various people, and while I thought it was a nice addition, the ones before and after Anakin's story were written by... they were written by... Oh god. I'm gonna vomit. They were written by the shillest of them all, making this the only thing in the comic that's bad. I refuse to say his name on my channel. Also, the book feels floppy, which I kind of like. Sometimes trades come and they feel stiffer, like the covers don't want to bend as much, and to open the book fully, you kind of need to crease right at the edge of the spine, or you have to crack the spine. But I like the floppiness in this because it means the book will open up nicely without damaging the cover or the spine. So overall, I was impressed with Age of the Republic Heroes. It really feels like the entire team really collaborated on this. It didn't feel like there was a writer, then an artist, then an inker, then a colourer. It felt like everyone was in one room working out how things would go and how they could do it better. So the comic had a good amount of everything in it. And I'm really impressed with how much the entire team managed to fit in each issue when they only had 24 pages. It really feels like they worked on it and wanted to deliver something special. Jody Houser did a great job balancing the amount of action and character development, and Smith, Santos and Tartaglia did fantastic jobs bringing everything to life. I really can't wait to read Age of the Republic Villains because Age of the Republic Heroes did such a great job exploring the characters, and to sum it up, Heroes was absolutely excellent, and it's the first comic in the Disney canon I've really enjoyed in such a long time. And to be honest, I do genuinely think it's a comic that fans of the expanded universe who don't like Disney will still enjoy. It's a really good comic.